At her graduation party, my daughter announced in front of 500 people, "I want to thank everyone except my father, who is an embarrassment." I stood up, smiled, and walked out. That night, I canceled her $130,000 student loan and cut her off completely. At 3 a.m., I had 73 missed calls. You know, the smell of sawdust and honest sweat is a scent I've worn like a second skin for most of my 55 years. It's the smell of my life's work. I'm a contractor from Cleveland, Ohio. My hands are more calloused than a pair of old work boots, and my knuckles are a roadmap of jobs done right, of walls framed and roofs laid. For 20 years, that work had a single shining purpose. My daughter, Madison. My Maddie. She was my world, not just a part of it, the whole entire thing. After her mother, Jessica, and I went our separate ways, Maddie became my North Star. Everything I did, every extra hour I stayed late on a job site, every weekend I gave up, it was all to build a foundation for her future. A future I wanted to be miles smoother than my own rough-and-tumble path. I can still picture her as a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, sitting in the passenger seat of my old Ford truck, her tiny feet barely reaching the edge of the seat. She'd hold my thermos for me and chatter on about her day at school, her face lit up with a gap-toothed grin. She loved that truck. She loved coming to the work sites with me on a Saturday, wearing a little pink hard hat I'd bought for her and supervising my crew. To her, I wasn't just a dad. I was a builder, a man who could make anything. And in my eyes, she was perfect. When she got into a prestigious private university in Southern California, her absolute dream school, the price tag was staggering. The kind of numbers that look like a typo on the page. The kind that would make a guy like me break out in a cold sweat. Jessica, who had remarried a wealthy surgeon, Dr. Richard Sterling, made it clear that while they'd help, the bulk of the financial burden was something I was expected to shoulder. My paternal responsibility, she'd called it. So I did what I had to do. I worked until the ache in my back became a permanent part of my posture. I took on side jobs, tiling bathrooms and finishing basements in the evenings until my eyes burned from exhaustion. And then I made the biggest sacrifice of all, my 1968 cherry red Mustang. It was my one true indulgence, the last piece of my younger self. I'd spent a decade restoring it, every bolt and piece of chrome polished by my own hands. Selling it felt like tearing out a piece of my own heart. But when that dealership check cleared, I didn't see a car I'd lost. I saw Maddie's first year of tuition. I saw her walking across that sunny California campus, a world away from the gray Cleveland winters. It was worth it, every penny. The graduation party wasn't a party. It was a Hollywood production. It was held at Jessica and Richard's mansion in Beverly Hills, a sprawling palace of white marble and glass that looked down on the rest of Los Angeles. I felt out of place the moment I pulled my 10-year-old Ford pickup into the valet line between a gleaming black Porsche and a silver Tesla. The valet kid, no older than Maddie, looked at my truck like it was a stray dog that had wandered onto the property. I smoothed down my off-the-rack suit from Men's Warehouse. It was the most expensive thing I owned, but next to the custom-tailored tuxedos and shimmering designer gowns, I felt like I was wearing a costume. In my pocket, my hand clutched a small, rectangular box. Inside was my gift for Maddie. It was a little jewelry box I'd made myself from bird's eye maple, the same wood I'd used to build her first crib. I'd spent weeks carving her initials into the lid, sanding it until it was as smooth as glass. It wasn't flashy, but it was from my hands. It was from my heart. Jessica greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Michael, so glad you could make it. It's quite the affair, isn't it? A bit different from what we're used to back in Cleveland." Her voice was like honey laced with just a drop of poison. Her friends, a circle of women with impossibly smooth faces and diamond earrings that caught the light, gave me quick, dismissive glances before turning back to their champagne flutes. I was an exhibit from their host's past life, a fossil from the working-class strata. I saw Maddie across the lawn, surrounded by a crowd of impossibly handsome young men and women who all looked like they'd just stepped out of a magazine. She was radiant, a queen in her own court. Our eyes met for a second. She gave me a small, tight wave before her attention was pulled back to her friends, their laughter echoing across the perfectly manicured grass. My heart sank just a little. I told myself she was just busy, that it was her big day. But a cold knot was already beginning to form in the pit of my stomach. Later, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Richard tapped a crystal glass with a spoon. "Everyone, may I have your attention? The graduate of the hour, my wonderful stepdaughter, Madison, would like to say a few words." A hush fell over the 500 guests. Maddie walked to a small, elegantly lit stage, beaming. She was breathtaking. My heart swelled with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. This was it. This was the moment all those late nights and lonely weekends were for. She started by thanking her mother. "To my mom, Jessica," she began, her voice clear and confident. "Thank you for your grace, your guidance, and for showing me what it means to build a beautiful life." The crowd applauded warmly. "And to my stepfather, Richard," she continued, turning to him with a glowing smile. "Thank you for your unwavering support, for believing in me, and for providing me with opportunities I could only dream of. You've been the father I always wished I had." A fist clenched in my gut. The words stung, but I kept a smile plastered on my face. "It's her day," I told myself. "Don't make it about you." I waited, expecting my name to come next, maybe a small, obligatory thank you. But what came next shattered my world into a million pieces. Maddie scanned the crowd, her gaze sweeping right past me. "And I want to thank everyone else who believed in me on my journey," she said, her voice ringing out across the silent lawn. She paused for effect, letting the moment hang in the air. Then she delivered the final blow. "Except for my father, whose constant presence has been nothing but an embarrassment." The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick, heavy, and suffocating. It sucked all the air from my lungs. A few people gasped, others shifted uncomfortably. I saw a couple of Maddie's friends smirk. In that instant, I wasn't a person anymore. I was just a punchline. The punchline to a joke I didn't even know was being told. The world went into slow motion. Every drop of warmth drained from my body, replaced by a cold, hollow clarity. The years of sacrifice, the sold Mustang, the nights spent aching and alone, it all flashed through my mind, not as a monument to my love for her, but as the foundation for my own public humiliation. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't cause a scene. Something inside me just broke. Quietly. I pushed my chair back, the scraping sound unnaturally loud in the dead silence. I stood up. I could feel every one of the 500 pairs of eyes on me. I looked at Maddie, who was staring back with a defiant, almost triumphant look on her face. I gave her a tight, pained smile, the best I could manage. It was the smile of a man whose heart had just been ripped out of his chest. Slowly, I reached into my coat, pulled out the hand-carved maple box, and placed it gently on the empty chair beside me. An unopened gift, an untold story. Then, without another word, I turned my back on my daughter, on my ex-wife, on their whole glittering, cruel world, and I walked away. The 1,800-mile drive back to Ohio from California was a blur of asphalt and betrayal. The city lights of Los Angeles, a glittering, indifferent monster in my rearview mirror, smeared into long streaks of neon hypocrisy. I kept my old Ford F-150 pointed east, the familiar rumble of the engine a lone comfort in the deafening silence. The smell of sawdust and old coffee in the cab was my reality, a world away from the perfume and privilege of that Beverly Hills mansion. My daughter's words played on a merciless loop in my head, except my father, who is an embarrassment. Embarrassment. The word echoed off every road sign, every passing semi-truck. Was it an embarrassment that my hands were calloused from building decks and framing houses to pay for her tutors? Was the faint scent of wood stain on my clothes an embarrassment when I'd show up to her high school plays, beaming from the back row? Was selling my '67 Mustang, the one piece of my youth I'd held onto, an embarrassment? That car was supposed to be hers one day. Instead, Its sale price became a semester's tuition at a school 2,000 miles away. Every sacrifice, every extra weekend job, every dollar I'd painstakingly set aside, she had just taken, twisted, and thrown back in my face in front of 500 strangers. I didn't head home right away. I couldn't. I checked into a cheap motel off I-15 in the middle of nowhere, the kind with a buzzing neon sign and doors that opened to the parking lot. The room was sterile, impersonal. It was perfect. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat on the edge of the stiff bed, the silence pressing in. Then, a cold, hard clarity cut through the pain. It was a feeling I knew well from my job, the moment you stop looking at the busted thing and start figuring out how to fix it. Or, in this case, how to tear it down. I pulled out my rugged, beat-up laptop, the one I use for estimates and invoices, and connected to the motel's spotty Wi-Fi. My fingers, usually steady enough to frame a wall to a 1/16 of an inch, trembled slightly as I typed in my bank's web address. I logged in, bypassed the main page, and went straight to the financial obligations section. There it was, in crisp black and white, parent plus loan. The balance, $130,421.18. My name was right there as the primary co-signer. My name was on the hook for every single cent. For 4 years, a chunk of my check had vanished every month to cover those payments, a sacrifice I made without a second thought, because that's what a father does. But the man she'd humiliated wasn't that father anymore. My grief was hardening into something else, something cold and resolute, like concrete setting in the winter. Methodically, I navigated through the menus, manage payments, cancel future automatic withdrawals. A confirmation box popped up. I clicked Confirm. Then I found the section for cosigner responsibilities. I followed the formal process to retract my financial backing, citing that the student was now a college graduate and an independent adult. Each click of the mouse was a deliberate, final snap. Then, I opened my email. I composed a new message, addressing it to both Madison and Jessica. I took a screenshot of the loan cancellation confirmation page and attached it. The body of the email was empty. For the subject line, I typed 2 words, each one a sharp, stinging indictment of what she'd done. Your wish is granted. I hit send, and for the first time in 18 years, I deliberately powered off my phone. An immediate, profound silence fell over the room. No calls, no texts. No way for their world to reach mine. I finally laid down and slept, a dreamless, heavy sleep, as if a great weight had finally been put down. I woke up when the sun was high in the sky, streaming through a gap in the cheap curtains. My body ached from the drive, but my mind was clear. For a long moment, I just stared at the phone on the nightstand. It was a black, silent rectangle, a sleeping viper. I knew what was waiting for me. I picked it up and held the power button. It vibrated to life, and the screen exploded. A waterfall of notifications cascaded down. 73 missed calls, 21 voicemails, and a text message count that just kept climbing past 200. I started reading. The first texts from Maddie were pure, unadulterated rage. How could you do this to me? You're trying to ruin my life. This isn't funny, Dad. Turn the payments back on, now. Then came Jessica's messages, dripping with the same condescending tone she'd used at the party. Michael, this is petty, even for you. You are legally obligated, and I will not hesitate to involve Richard's legal team. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. But as the hours ticked by from the night before, the tone shifted. The rage gave way to a dawning panic. Maddie's messages became desperate pleas. Dad, please call me. We need to talk about this. Okay, I'm sorry. What I said was horrible. Please, I'm begging you. Call me. Dad, please, I don't know what to do. I read them all, one by one, a strange detachment washing over me. The pain was still there, a low, throbbing ache, but it was now overlaid with a burning question. Why? Why embarrassment? We'd always been so close. This wasn't just a sudden burst of snobbery. This was learned. This was taught. I ignored every text and every call. I got in my truck and drove the rest of the way home to Cleveland. Back in my small, 2-bedroom house, the one she grew up in, The truth began to whisper from the walls. I started digging, not for a fight, but for an answer. I pulled out the old photo albums. There she was, a little girl with a gap-toothed grin, sitting on my shoulders at a 4th of July parade. There we were, covered in mud, holding up a crooked birdhouse we'd built together. In every photo, she was looking at me with pure adoration. The girl in those pictures would never have said what she said. So what happened? My sister Sarah gave me the first piece of the puzzle. I called her, my voice hoarse, and told her what happened. After a long silence, she sighed. "Oh, Mike," she said softly, "I didn't want to tell you, to hurt you, but for years, Jessica has been dropping little comments. Every time I saw her at one of Maddie's school events after the divorce, it was something. Maddie is destined for better things than this little town, or I hope she doesn't pick up Michael's simple approach to life. It was subtle, like a slow poison. She was building a wall between you two, brick by brick, telling Maddie that your world was something to escape, not to be proud of. The final devastating piece of the puzzle, however, I found myself. It was hidden in a dusty accordion file in my office labeled Divorce Settlement. Jessica had always claimed I'd lost a huge chunk of Maddie's college fund in a stupid, risky business deal right before we split. It became her go-to narrative for why she had to marry Richard, for why they had to step in and save the day. I'd always carried a quiet shame about it, letting her control that story. But as I sat at my kitchen table, I finally looked at the paperwork, and my blood ran cold. The stupid business deal was a mutual investment fund we'd both agreed on. Her signature was right there next to mine, clear as day. But that wasn't the bomb. The bomb was in the bank statements from the months that followed. I saw the initial college fund, a healthy sum we'd built together. And then I saw the withdrawals, major withdrawals, not to a failed investment, but to Jessica's personal account. I cross-referenced the dates. One large sum matched the down payment on the BMW she bought herself right after we separated. Another matched the deposit she put down on her first fancy rental in Calabasas before Richard was even in the picture. She hadn't just lied. She had stolen our daughter's future to finance her own, then expertly pinned the blame on me for more than a decade. I wasn't an embarrassment who failed. I was the unwitting cleanup crew for her deception. The guy who took out a massive financial obligation to fill a hole that she had secretly, methodically, and selfishly dug herself. The anger I felt in that moment was white-hot. This wasn't just about an insult at a party. This was about a lie that had poisoned my daughter's mind and hollowed out the last decade of my life. And now, Maddie was on her way to repeat those lies to my face. Let her come. This time, I'd be ready. A few days went by in a blur of numb routine. I went to my job sites, I measured drywall, I talked to subs about lumber prices and timelines. On the outside, I was the same Michael I'd always been. But inside, it was like a pilot light had been blown out. The fire that had driven me for 20 years, the one lit by the simple goal of giving my daughter a better life, was gone. All that was left was a cold, quiet space, filled with the lingering smell of her betrayal. I didn't know what came next. For the first time in my adult life, I had no plan beyond getting through the day. Then, one evening, the doorbell rang. It was late, after 9 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. I figured it was a package delivery driver running late, or a neighborhood kid selling fundraiser candy. I opened the door, and my breath got stuck in my throat. It was Maddie, but it wasn't the polished, radiant graduate from the party. The girl on my porch looked like a ghost. Her expensive hair was a mess, thrown into a sloppy bun. Her face was pale and blotchy, her eyes red and swollen. She was wearing a wrinkled sweatshirt and leggings that looked like she'd been sleeping in them for days. A world away from the designer dress and perfect smile I'd last seen her in. She stood there, vibrating with a desperate, frantic energy, clutching her phone in a white-knuckled grip. She didn't say hello. She didn't say Dad. She pushed past me into the small foyer of my house, her eyes darting around like she was casing the joint, her lip curled in a familiar look of disdain. "I can't believe you did this," she spat, her voice raspy and high-pitched. "I cannot believe you would be so petty, so jealous." I closed the door slowly, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I had imagined this confrontation 100 times. I thought I'd be angry, that I'd yell back. But seeing her there, so ravaged and lost, all I felt was a profound, weary sadness. "You're ruining my life," she half shrieked, whirling to face me. "My whole future, all my plans, everything is gone because you couldn't handle being a failure for 5 minutes. You had to lash out and try to ruin me too." The words, sharp and cruel, bounced off the walls of my quiet house. They were Jessica's words, just delivered in Maddie's voice. The same script my ex-wife used for years, perfected and handed down to her daughter. "Mom and Richard had to pay for my party, my clothes, everything," she continued, tears of rage now streaming down her cheeks. "You know why? Because you lost all my college money on some stupid, pathetic business deal years ago. You had one job, one thing to save for, and you blew it. You were a failure then, and you're a failure now. And you're trying to drag me down with you." This was it, the moment of truth, the carefully constructed lie she had been fed her whole life. For a second, a hot flash of anger surged through me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her and tell her how wrong she was. But then I looked at her, at this angry, confused child standing in the middle of my living room, and I knew yelling wouldn't fix a thing. Only the cold, hard, documented truth would work. I didn't say a word. I held her gaze for a long moment, letting her accusations hang in the air between us, heavy and toxic. Then I turned my back on her and walked calmly toward my small office off the living room. "What, are you walking away from me?" she screamed at my back. "Just like you always do? You can't even face it." I ignored her. I sat down in my creaky office chair, pulled the key from a small dish on the desk, and unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. From the very back I pulled out a thick, worn brown accordion file, its elastic band stretched and frayed. It was heavy with the weight of my past, with the truth. I walked back into the living room where Maddie was still standing, her arms crossed, watching me with a look of pure contempt. I walked right past her to the old oak kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped her with her elementary school homework, where we'd carved pumpkins and built gingerbread houses. I placed the accordion file on the table with a soft thud. "You want to talk about stupid business deals, Maddie?" I said, my voice quiet, devoid of emotion. "Let's talk." I unhooked the elastic band and pulled out the first stack of papers, bound with a rubber band. I laid them on the table. This was the stupid business deal, an investment in a small real estate development, highly recommended by our financial advisor at the time. "Look here." I slid the top page toward her. "This is the signature page. That's my signature. And right next to it, that's your mother's." Maddie glared at the paper, then back at me, her jaw tight. "So what? She trusted you. You probably talked her into it." "No," I said, my voice still level. "This stupid business deal, as you call it, was your mother's idea. She was the one who was excited about it. This," I said, pulling out a second file, "is the truth, Maddie." I laid out a series of bank statements from 12 years ago. I spread them like a hand of cards. "This is the joint savings account we had, your original college fund, the one we started the day you were born." I pointed with my finger to a date, just 3 weeks after our divorce was finalized. "See this withdrawal? A cashier's check for $62,000. And here's the carbon copy, made out to Beverly Hills Luxury Imports." Her eyes followed my finger. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "And this one," I continued, tapping another statement from 2 weeks after that. "A wire transfer, $75,000, to a Calabasas title company. It was the down payment on the house she and Richard moved into." I looked up from the papers and straight into her eyes. "The college fund wasn't lost in a failed deal, Maddie. It bought your mother a new Mercedes and a new house." The air went out of her. It was like I had physically punched her in the stomach. She stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. The rage in her eyes flickered, replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. But I wasn't finished. I reached back into the accordion file and pulled out a crisp, new folder. "And this," I said, laying the statements for the Parent Plus loan on top of the others, "is the $130,000 I took out to make sure you could still go to your dream school. My name is the only one on it. And these," I said, fanning out the payment confirmations, are every single monthly payment I have made, on time, for the last 4 years, out of my own pocket, alone. The full, unvarnished truth was laid bare on the table between us. It was an altar of my sacrifice and her mother's deceit. Then I pulled out one last file, a thin one. It was a savings account statement. "And this," I said, my voice finally cracking with the slightest bit of emotion, "is the new college fund I started for you, the day after your mother cleared out the old one. It's not much, but I put something in it every single week for 12 years. I never stopped saving for you." Not once. Maddie stared at the mountain of evidence on the table. Her face had gone from pale to ashen. The lies she had built her world upon, the narrative of the successful mother and the embarrassing failure of a father, had just been systematically and brutally demolished by a stack of old paper. She looked at the loan documents, then at the statements for the secret savings account, then back at me. The contempt was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was the raw, gaping wound of understanding. Her father wasn't an embarrassment. He was her silent, uncelebrated savior, and in front of 500 people, she had taken a knife and twisted it in his heart. The realization hit her not like a thought, but like a physical blow, and her whole body sagged under its terrible weight. The silence in my small Cleveland kitchen was heavier than any machine I'd ever hoisted. It was a suffocating weight, pressing down on the two of us, filled with the ghosts of broken promises and unspoken truths. The documents I'd laid out on the worn oak table seemed to glow under the single overhead light. Bank statements, investment papers, copies of checks, each one a nail in the coffin of the lies Maddie had been fed for a decade. She stood frozen, her eyes wide, darting from the papers to my face and back again. The vibrant, confident young woman who had dismissed me in front of hundreds of people was gone. In her place was a pale, trembling girl who looked like she'd just seen the world split open. The color had drained from her cheeks, leaving her designer dress looking like a hollow costume. Her breath came in shallow, ragged bursts. Her tears weren't loud or dramatic. They were silent, fat drops that slid down her face and fell onto the linoleum floor with an almost imperceptible tap, tap, tap. A part of me, the father part that was wired into my very DNA, wanted to reach out, to pull her into a hug, and tell her it would be okay. But a stronger part, the part that had been trampled on in front of an amphitheater of strangers, knew I couldn't. Not yet. That would be wiping away the lesson before it had a chance to sink in. She needed to feel this. She needed to understand the true weight of her words, of her choices. "This is the real world now, Maddie," I said, my voice steady but devoid of its usual warmth. It was the voice I used on a job site when a serious mistake had been made. It's not a Beverly Hills party. There are no applause lines. There are just actions and consequences. You're an adult with a degree from a fancy university. You have to deal with the consequences of your choices. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She just shook her head slowly, a single, agonizing motion of denial. She took a stumbling step back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. She didn't look at me again. She turned, fumbled with the doorknob for a second, and then was gone, the screen door slapping shut behind her. She didn't even take her purse. I watched through the window as she got into her car, a graduation gift from Richard, I was sure, and just sat there for a full 5 minutes, her shoulders shaking, before the engine finally turned over and the taillights disappeared down my quiet, working-class street. The damning pile of papers remained on my table, an abandoned testament to the truth. I didn't hear from her directly for 2 days. The silence was a tense, humming wire. I could only imagine the scene that played out when she arrived back in California. I pictured her, shell-shocked and armed with copies of my documents, bursting into that sterile, white mansion in Calabasas. I could almost hear the confrontation. Jessica, her mother, would have tried to deflect first, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "Oh, honey, your father is just so bitter. He's twisting things to hurt us." She'd try to gaslight Maddie, to paint me as a failed, vindictive man trying to poison her mind. But the evidence was irrefutable. Signatures, dates, account numbers. I imagined Richard, the stoic surgeon, initially standing by his wife, a united front of wealth and status. Then I saw his expression shifting as Maddie laid out the proof. He wasn't a fool, he was a man of logic and facts. He would see the transfer of funds from Maddie's original college account to an account used for a new car and a down payment. He would see that the failed business deal was a mutual investment that Jessica had signed off on with a flourish. The carefully constructed facade of their perfect family would have cracked, then shattered. The screaming match, when it came, would have been epic, echoing off the marble floors and glass walls. And in that moment, I knew Richard wouldn't be looking at Jessica as his beloved wife. He'd be looking at her as a liability, a social and financial risk who had just exposed their entire world to a very ugly, very public truth. His support would curdle into cold, calculated assessment. My suspicions were confirmed on the third day. I was out back in my workshop, the familiar scent of sawdust and machine oil a small comfort, when a sleek black car I didn't recognize pulled into my gravel driveway. A man in a suit that probably cost more than my truck's engine stepped out, carrying a pristine leather briefcase. He wasn't here for a construction bid. He handed me a stiff, cream-colored envelope. My name and address were printed in crisp, formal type. "You've been served," he said, his voice as flat and colorless as his expression, before turning on his heel and driving away. Back in my kitchen, I tore it open. The letterhead was from a high-powered Los Angeles law firm. It was a cease and desist letter, but it wasn't from Maddie. It was from Jessica. It was a masterpiece of legal threats and manufactured outrage. It accused me of a malicious campaign of libel and slander, of causing Jessica severe emotional distress, and of attempting to intentionally sabotage her familial relationships. It demanded I retract my false statements to Maddie and cease all communication with her and her mother, or they would pursue a lawsuit to the fullest extent of the law. I read it twice, then a third time, and then I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a dry, weary, hollow laugh. This was her move, not remorse, not an apology, not even a quiet retreat. Her daughter's world had been turned upside down, her heart broken by her own mother's deceit, and Jessica's first and only move was to hire a lawyer to threaten the man who told the truth. It was all about control, about saving face with her country club friends and her surgeon husband. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to bully the truth back into the shadows. That letter was the final nail. Any flicker of doubt I might have had, any thought that I had been too cruel to my daughter, was extinguished. I wasn't just fighting for my own dignity anymore. I was fighting to keep my daughter from being swallowed whole by her mother's bottomless toxicity. Jessica wasn't capable of change. She was only capable of damage control, and I would not let her damage Maddie anymore. I carefully folded the letter, slid it into the same accordion file with all the other evidence, and knew, with absolute certainty, that this was far from over. A month passed, an entire month of silence. The lawyer's letter from Jessica threatening me for telling my own daughter the truth was tucked away in the same file with all the other documents. It was a joke, a desperate bluff from a woman who had been caught, but it served as a constant reminder of the world Maddie had chosen over me. I hadn't heard a peep from her since she'd left my house, shell-shocked and silent. Not a call, not a text. Part of me was relieved. The other part, the father in me that I couldn't just switch off, felt a dull, constant ache. My life had returned to a routine. Wake up before dawn, grab coffee from my old drip machine, head to a job site, come home smelling of sawdust and sweat, and sit in a house that felt too quiet. Then, one Tuesday evening, it happened. I was at the kitchen sink, rinsing my plate, when a soft, hesitant knock echoed from the front door. It was so different from the frantic banging of her last visit that I almost didn't recognize it. I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked to the door, my heart doing a slow, heavy thump in my chest. I looked through the peephole. It was Maddie. She stood on my small concrete porch, hunched slightly against the cool Ohio air. She wasn't the glamorous, entitled girl from the party, nor the screaming, desperate wreck who had accused me of ruining her life. This was someone else. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no fancy styling. She was wearing a plain gray hoodie and worn-out sneakers. She was just a young woman standing on her father's porch, looking lost. I opened the door. She flinched as if expecting me to slam it in her face. Her eyes, wide and tired, met mine. They were red-rimmed, but she wasn't crying. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Maddie," I said, my tone flat. I didn't invite her in. I just stood there, waiting. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clutching a folded sheaf of papers in her hand like a shield. Can I come in? For just a minute? I won't yell, I promise." I stepped back and held the door open. She slipped past me, her shoulders drawn in, as if trying to make herself smaller. She didn't look at the photos on the mantel or the familiar furniture she grew up with. Her eyes were fixed on the worn linoleum of my kitchen floor. She walked to the kitchen table, the very same table where I had laid out the truth for her, and stopped. "I got a job," she said abruptly, not looking at me. "It's at a coffee shop downtown. The morning shift." I just nodded, leaning against the counter. She took a deep breath and unfolded the papers in her hand, placing them carefully on the table. It was several sheets of loose-leaf paper, covered in neat, careful handwriting. Columns of numbers, words like rent, shared, groceries, bus pass. "This is my budget," she said. "I found 2 roommates online. We're getting a cheap apartment in Lakewood. It's not Beverly Hills." A small, bitter laugh escaped her lips. "This is what I earn per week. And this," she pointed to a line item at the bottom, "is what I can put toward the student obligation every month. It's not much. At this rate, it'll take me, 30 years to pay it off. But I'm going to do it. I just wanted you to know that. I'm going to pay it off myself." She finally looked up at me, and that's when her composure broke. Tears welled in her eyes and began to stream silently down her face. "I was so awful to you, Dad," she choked out, the words tumbling over each other in a rush of shame. "I spent all those years believing a story that made me feel special and made you look small. I was so desperate to fit into their world, their money, their shiny parties. I was willing to throw away the only person who was ever truly in mine. Standing on that stage, saying what I said, I thought it was my big moment, but it was the lowest I've ever been." She swiped at her tears with the back of her hand. "I went back and confronted Mom. She and Richard. It was exactly like you said. She tried to deny it, but I had the copies of the papers you gave me." Richard just stood there, looking at her like he'd never seen her before. Their perfect life blew up. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is what I did to you." She took another shaky breath, her gaze direct and unflinching. "At my graduation party, surrounded by all those important people, I called you an embarrassment." Her voice cracked and she had to force the next words out. "I was the embarrassment, Dad. I was." The silence in the kitchen was absolute, broken only by her quiet sobs. All the anger that had been simmering in me for a month, all the cold resolve, it just dissolved. I saw past the spoiled brat from the party and the cruel stranger who had disowned me. I saw my daughter, my little girl, all grown up and finally, painfully, understanding the weight of her choices. I walked over to the table and looked down at her handwritten budget. I saw the small, careful numbers. I saw the sacrifice. I saw the effort. I nodded slowly, not in forgiveness, but in acknowledgement. She had done the work. Then I turned and went to my small office nook in the corner of the living room. I pulled out the worn accordion file, not the one with the divorce papers, but the other one, the one she didn't know I had. I brought it back to the kitchen table and pulled out a single statement. I laid it down next to her budget. It was from a savings account, an account she had never seen before. It had a substantial balance. She looked at it, confused, her tears slowing. What is this?" "After your mom cleaned out the first college fund, I started over. In secret," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "Every overtime shift, every weekend job, a little bit went in here. I sold the Mustang for a down payment on the student obligation, but I never stopped saving for you. This was always for you, Maddie, for your future." Her eyes darted from the account statement to my face, her expression a mix of shock and dawning comprehension. "I'm not just going to pay off the debt for you. I continued, tapping a finger on her budget sheet. That wouldn't teach you anything. But you're not going to do this alone either. We're going to clear this debt, but we're doing it together. The first lesson is financial literacy. The real kind. Not the kind that gets you a fancy car, but the kind that gives you freedom. There was no big hug, no movie moment reconciliation. It was better than that. It was real. She sat down in one of the wooden kitchen chairs, staring at the papers. I pulled up the chair beside her. Side by side at our old kitchen table, I picked up a pen and pointed to the first line on her budget. "Okay," I said, my voice husky with emotion I couldn't quite hide. "Let's start here. We were rebuilding, not just a budget, but a relationship, on a new foundation of honesty, mutual respect, and hard-earned truth.